With late round picks like Puka Nacua, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Kyron Williams tilting dynasty leagues over the last few years, we have learned that hitting on these third, fourth, and fifth round rookie picks is one of the best and proven ways to completely reshape your dynasty roster. And today, Jeff Bell and I are going to talk about some of our favorite players that you can target late in your rookie drafts this year. Jeff, go ahead and start us off. Who is a guy that you are targeting in rounds 3, 4, and 5 of your rookie draft?
Yeah, deeper into round 5. If we're going to start with quarterbacks, I'm going to go with my guy from my alma mater, and he transferred to Indiana, but Kurtis Rourke, I think, is a really under the radar guy. He played the entire season on a torn ACL. He got surgery to repair that once the season ended. He led Indiana, of all places, Indiana, to the college football playoff, and he played the second half of the season with a mashed finger on his throwing hand. And so that kind of tells you the type of guy that you're dealing with. His older brother, Nathan, has been around NFL camps. He's never really made the active roster, but he spent some time with the Jaguars. So there is some level of pedigree in that family of NFL experience. And when you look at Rourke, he's bigger guy. Was much more athletic at Ohio University when he wasn't playing on a torn ACL. And he kind of brings it's out of sight, out of mind because of that recovery. He's not able to go through drills, those types of things. And so he hasn't popped in the radar for very many people. But I think when you look at tools and potential and experience, all those types of things, I think he makes a great candidate for one of these, the late round proverbial Brock Purdy.
Now, I didn't look at the medical records, but I believe you said mashed finger, Jeff. Was that the medical term that they diagnosed him with? Mashed finger? No, I like that one. Kurtis Rourke is a good one. This quarterback class I'm conflicted with because I think Cam Ward is relatively safe. You can get him going number 1 overall. The Titans are going to give him a nice leash. You got Shedeur Sanders, who is getting steam as a potential top 2, top 3 pick. I think that he'll have a decent leash as well if he gets out there. But outside of that, I think you do really have to kind of scour late in the drafts to find the hidden gems. And we talked about it last week, Riley Leonard potentially being that guy that you could pick up. Probably not going to be a long-term starter, but if he gets the opportunity, the rushing upside is there for him. Jalen Milroe, another guy with rushing upside, but Kurtis Rourke is the guy who doesn't just have the plug and play, hey, I need a guy this week in my super flex spot sort of upside. He is a guy that could actually be a starter in this league. And that's not something you normally get late in your rookie draft. So I like that call out a lot. I'm going to talk about a guy that I've talked about quite a bit on this show already, Jaylin Noel out of Iowa State. Very, very big fan of the player. Just one of those guys that it seems like the more I watch him, the more I like him. He had more receiving yards last year than Jaden Higgins, a guy who is, consensus ranked well ahead of Jaylin Noel. But Jaylin Noel, he played a lot out of the slot. He did a lot of the dirty work, the underneath routes, the catches across the middle of the field. But he is just a very polished route runner. When I watch him, I'm just blown away by his footwork. I mean, in his ability to separate at the top of his routes. He's just a very fluid athlete as well. Very strong after the catch. He's good at attacking at the catch point. For a smaller guy, he's still really good at coming down with contested catches. And he had nearly 3 yards per route run last year. 2.62 yards per route run is a very, very good metric to clear. So Jaylin Noel is a guy that I think is starting to creep up a little bit more, Jeff. I am happily taking him at the top of round 3, but I'm seeing him move up a little bit. And I don't know if you saw today, Chris Sims came out with his wide receiver rankings, and he had Jaylin Noel inside his top 5, which is only going to make him move up from there. And I think that's a nice segue into the guy that you'd like to talk about, another wide receiver, Jeff.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Kyle Williams. And Kyle Williams is a dude. So that is the way that I'm going to describe him. He is a dude. I think he profiles very, very well for a high volume role in the NFL. You talk about Chris Sims' list. He was number 2 on Chris Sims' list. And I know part of it's probably because he's not, I don't know if he's even in sleeper yet. He might be at this point, but when we look at our Football Guys ADP that our Joey Wright has been running to go on that website, he's not even listed in the Football Guys rookie ADP because through most of that, he's not been involved in sleeper. And so it's, again, talk about Kurtis Rourke, out of sight, out of mind through the pre-draft process. Kyle Williams in the fantasy circles as some level of out of sight, out of mind as well, because people hadn't been able to select him for a long period of time. When they do these rookie mocks or even their rookie drafts, you would have to use a placeholder. And naturally, I think for a lot of people's minds, they're going to think a guy that I need a placeholder for is probably not very, very good. I don't really know why it took so long to get him into the database, but I think he's a guy that definitely belongs there.
Yeah, he's a guy that you put me on, and when I messaged you, I remember, like, I watched a couple games of Kyle Williams, and I just messaged you, and I was like, "This guy just plays with the swagger of a wide receiver one." Like, I don't know how else to put it. Like, we could talk about, how refined his footwork is and how he's able to leverage defensive backs and all those things, but it's one of those things, like, if you just watch Kyle Williams play, you go, "This is a skill set that's gonna be transferable to the NFL." He's a good player, and sometimes it's really just as simple as that. Now we got some other wide receivers that we want to talk about. I've got another wide receiver, and so do you, Jeff. I think these are the guys. We open up the show talking about Amon St. Brown and Puka Nakua. These are the guys that do kind of fall into day three. And first of all, we want to say these aren't sure things. Like draft capital is important. And these guys, if they're falling into day three, it is going to be an uphill battle for fantasy relevance, but that doesn't mean it's impossible. And if you've started this rookie scouting process at all, looking at numbers, you are assuredly aware of Nick Nash. He led the NCAA last year in targets, receptions, yards, and touchdowns. But he played in the Mountain West, didn't have any real target competition there. But still, he's a quarterback who knows how to find the soft spots in zones, and that's something that quarterbacks like. So whether he profiles, we're already hearing that he might have to move to tight end at the NFL level. Maybe he can play that big slot. We're really getting bogged down with just the technicalities here. I don't know if he's going to be a wide receiver or a tight end or a slot or what it is that he'll do, but he's got the size to be a red zone threat. He's a very fluid mover. He's good at making plays after the catch, and the production speaks for itself. You see what he did last year at San Jose State. So a guy who is a little bit older but has the frame that he can be a wide receiver one at the NFL level. Of course, he's going to fall a little bit because of the questions about the competition he had to play against in college, but I see that production, and that alone is enough for me to want to take a chance on Nick Nash if he's there in round 3 or 4.
Yeah, based upon nothing at all, but I do think that when you're looking at some of these deeper digs and you're looking at these day three players, it does seem to be players that figured out how to be productive at the college
Mm-hmm.
level, especially the ones that don't have the elite physical gifts that push them up into the top versus kind of you're talking about maybe those guys that do have those elite gifts but never really put it together and didn't figure out in a 3 or 4 year career how to play against guys that are going to be selling insurance and playing on golf courses for what charity outings, whatever it might be for the
Uh-huh.
rest of their lives. That seems to be something that translates that guys can figure out how to make it work and figure out how to be that, can figure out a way. And you talk about Puka Nakua at the beginning of the show.
Yep.
I mean, he was a day three guy. They brought him in. Sean McVay basically he did one thing in camp, and we did one thing. You watch the beginning of his Rams career; those first couple games, basically had him running one or two routes, and that expanded into now he's running the entire route tree and involved in different areas. And these players that have that diverse skill set that are able to do one thing really well and expand and grow upon that because they've had that experience in the past are the under the radar type players that you really want to look for.
Yeah, and you talk about being productive at college, being something not to totally ignore. And Puka Nakua, his last 2 years at BYU, he was averaging over 70 yards per game. You look at Amon St. Brown, his last 2 years at USC, he was averaging over 80 yards per game. So I think you don't want to use college production as the guiding light for your draft process here. But like you said, players who found a way to produce in college, you don't want to ignore that. Who's the next guy you don't want to talk about, Jeff? I think we got one more wide receiver here before we switch over to some running backs.
Well, I talked about you want to find players that were productive in college and not just athlete bets. And so, of course, I'm going to talk about an athlete bet, and that is Isaiah Neyor. And when you look at him, I mean, he had that 9.98 relative athletic score. This is a big guy. He dealt with a lot of injuries. He was on the Devy radar because he popped it ended up being his third year at Wyoming and then transferred to Texas after sitting out a year. I mean, this is an older prospect. This is a guy that the production has been really, really iffy. But when you look at placing a bet on a high level athlete, figuring it out in a guy that can do things that very few players are able to do, that would be Isaiah Neyor out of Nebraska is where he ended up playing. 3 different colleges, missed an entire season in 2022 with injury. Texas, he was supposed to be in that wide receiver rotation with Xavier Worthy and Adonai Mitchell that went to the college football playoff, and he was not because he only played one game. But bet on an athlete occasionally really late.
And the thing, you can make bets on athletes, you can make bets on productive guys, you can make bets on young guys. The reality is we don't know. And if there was one answer that this is how you find that late round breakout, they wouldn't be a late round guy. They'd be moving up into rounds 1 or 2. But the reality is, there are going to be question marks with all the guys that we're discussing on today's show. And Jeff, I'm really excited about the next guy I get to talk about, because on the fantasy football show with Alfredo Brown, he basically has a no Tahj Brooks rule with me, because I've talked about this guy so much and he's sick of hearing about him. I don't think you and I have had the Tahj Brooks discussion yet, but he is a player that I just love to watch. And the production, of course, is there. He's an older guy. And, a lot of people say that he was just kind of a man beating up on boys his final year in college here, but he was top 10 in attempts, yards, and touchdowns. And he's a little bit older and he doesn't have the long speed that we want to see. But what I was so enamored by when watching him is his ability to just navigate through traffic. He's got exceptional footwork. And if you watch the combine drills, his footwork really showed out there. He was able to check elite grades in the 3-cone and the shuttle drill, which are both important metrics for running backs. Actually, Tej Seth from Summer Sports recently did a study, and those 2 drills, the 3-cone and the shuttle, are the ones that translate most to production at the NFL level. So he's going to slide a little bit because of his age, but he's a guy with an NFL frame who has the college production to back it up. And I think that because of the age, dynasty managers are going to see a 24-year-old rookie and they're not going to want anything to do with him. But he's a guy that can get drafted and be an immediate day one contributor. So big fan of Tahj Brooks, a guy who is regularly falling into the back end of round 5. And I just can't stop drafting him when I'm there. Jeff, do you have any strong, good or bad takes on Tahj Brooks?
I find it really hard to have strong running back takes, especially in this class, in that that running back 6 to about running back 27 range, just because I think so much of it is going to matter where they end up and what it looks like where they end up. Because more than any other position, it can be last man standing, it can be the lack of production, versus when you're kind of looking at, especially wide receivers, trying to profile certain archetypes into certain roles that translate best for fantasy success. And so I'm not going to ban you on Tahj Brooks or anything like that, but I do think
this is a round 5 guy we're talking about here.
Yeah. And I mean, I do know that you did this entire show idea just because you wanted to talk about Tahj Brooks too. So I'll let that fly too. But no, I think you hit on good points there, and he certainly has the type of profile that can handle volume, and that's what you're often searching for when it comes to the running back position. Just need to see where he ends up.
And that's why we've only got 2 running backs on the show, because the reality is landing spot does matter a lot. And if any of these guys land somewhere where they've got 2 proven veterans ahead of them, the chances of them seeing the field are pretty slim. But if there's a clear path to a workload here, those are really the guys you want to target at the end of your draft. But Tahj Brooks is a guy that I have liked quite a bit through this draft process. And Jeff, talk to me about a running back that you hope will get a good landing spot in April.
Yeah, talk about traits. Jaydon Blue is traits. I mean, he is a elite level athlete, high speed. He's decent in the passing game. I think a lot of the passing game that people talk about came from the game against Ohio State in the playoff. That's what a lot of people saw. He had 2 wheel route touchdowns in that he kind of, some broken coverage that he was able to get through and score on those 2 touchdowns. I think when you look at his frame, the way that he stacks up, you would expect him to be that pass catching back. But again, you're making a bet on an explosive athlete. And usually we talk about, I think the argument for Tahj Brooks is the potential volume that he can handle. I think the argument for Jaydon Blue is he can create explosive plays. And NFL offenses are searching desperately for players able to create explosive plays. This is that type of player. And at least where, again, I built my list off the Football Guys ADP that has come from the mock drafts that Joey Wright runs multiple times a week. Check those out on social media and try to join those if you're interested. Jaydon Blue is very, very low in those ADP rankings.
Yeah, and like you said, that big plays, there's not a lot of people that can do that. And Jaydon Blue might have some faults in his game, but, Devon Achane had a lot of faults in his game, and he landed in a perfect offense where they were able to get him in space and let him rip off those big plays. And we saw what his rookie season looked like. Now, I don't want to say that every fast running back coming into the league is going to be the next Devon Achane, but that is the type of ceiling for a guy like Jaydon Blue, a guy who can score anytime he touches the ball. So I like that one. Jaydon Blue is a guy that I've also been drafting after one of my league mates snipes me on Tahj Brooks. All right, Jeff. Got another guy that I want to talk about here. And, I was going to talk about Terrence Ferguson, but I've talked about him enough. And he is starting to creep up draft boards to the point that he's not really a late round guy anymore. I'm seeing him typically go and at the end of round 2, beginning of round 3. So I'm going to talk about another tight end crush that I have. Luke Lachey out of Iowa. And really, I could just end it right there. Tight end out of Iowa, take a chance because these guys are pretty good. And I know, not supposed to helmet scout, but seriously, when you look at it, George Kittle, TJ Hawkinson, Sam Laporta, Noah Fant, you go back, that's where Dallas Clark played. They're doing something to these Iowa boys to get them ready for playing tight end at the NFL level. But Luke Lachey, is a guy that I just really like. 2022 is when he kind of came out of the scene a little bit. 2023 was supposed to be his year. He got hurt early in the season. But if you go back and watch the game that they played against Utah State, it was the first game of the 2023 season. Luke Lachey was the focal point of that offense. They were using him on every route you could imagine. He was catching balls deep downfield. He was catching slants. They were using him in the red zone. And it seemed like that was going to be his big breakout season. And then he broke his ankle. 2023 season was over. 2024 never really got back up to speed. And we see that typically. I mean, I think if you look at just Mark Andrews this recent season, he has that foot injury and then doesn't come back and just isn't really himself until late in the season. And I think that's what happened with Luke Lachey is that he was just still recovering from that injury. And I think that some of the gleam from 2022 had worn off, but then he came out to the combine and he looked good at the combine. Didn't run a 40, but had elite explosive scores. Did it at 6'6", 251 pounds. So he's one of those guys, if you watch him play, he just looks like an NFL-ready tight end. He's big, he's strong, he plays through contact, he's got good hands, and because the production hasn't been there over the last couple of years, he's floating under the radar in this very deep tight end class, but I've got him inside my top 7 tight ends, which might sound like a pretty damning number, but with how deep this class is, tight end 7 is still a guy who could very well go inside the top 3 rounds on draft day. Jeff, what are your thoughts on Luke Lachey?
So Luke Lachey should have been a Buckeye, and it's absolutely ridiculous that he wasn't a Buckeye. His father, Jim, was in the Ring of Honor at Ohio State. He was a multiple-time Pro Bowl offensive tackle for the Washington Redskins at that period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And he has been the play-by-play color guy for Ohio State for the last 20 years. Luke Lachey grew up not even 10 minutes away from Ohio Stadium, and he was a top 10 tight end in his class. And when it comes to recruiting, but instead they took a kid named Joe Royer out of Cincinnati that he, after like a year or two, ended up transferring back to Cincinnati. And that is really what I had to say about Luke Lachey, and that is where my heart lies on him. And I'm pulling for him because, again, he should have been a Buckeye, and it's absolutely ridiculous that he wasn't. And
I didn't know
when
that
this show
backstory
is,
about his dad being the color
yes,
commentator for Ohio State.
yes,
That actually is kind of crazy. But maybe he just saw the Pro Bowl funnel of tight ends coming out of Iowa and said, "That's what I
no,
want to do."
he was heartbroken. They didn't offer him.
Oh,
No, they didn't offer him. And he was in it. When I knew the story at
mm.
first, I thought, well, okay, maybe he came in as an under the radar guy. And then when I looked working on the guide, when I looked him up in where he was in his high school class, he was a top 10 tight end in his high school class. And it's just, that's ridiculous to me. That is overthinking it to the nth degree. And that is basically when this episode gets viewed in the Woody Hayes Center, like we all know it will be. That is what I want everybody to know there.
All right, we got one more tight end, Jeff, to wrap up the show. Who's another tight end going late in rookie drafts that you're into?
This is another guy that actually could have been a Buckeye, but it's CJ Dippre, and he started out in Maryland. He made an impact pretty quickly in Maryland. There was, again, I'm going to talk about Ohio State, but there was a very epic back and forth overtime game against Maryland when Dwayne Haskins was the quarterback, and CJ Dippre had a touchdown in that game. So that kind of tells you how his path. After 2 years, he transferred from Maryland. He was weighing between Ohio State and Alabama, and he decided to go to Alabama. He has been kind of a supporting talent in that offense. Another relative athletic score guy. And Isaiah Neyor, talk about his relative athletic score. CJ Dippre was the number 2 tight end in the class in relative athletic score. He's an underrated explosive athlete. He comes in profiles probably more as a blocker, largely because that's what Alabama asked him to do. But he's one of these guys that he has the skill set to be able to be a 3-down tight end. And I think he's just way, way, way under the radar when it comes to dynasty and that mindset.
Well, there you have it, Jeff. We promised 9 players that we were going to talk about today, but we slipped in a little Riley Leonard and a little Jalen Milroe and some other guys as well. So under promise, over deliver. That's what we did on today's show, I think, Jeff. But just a quick recap here. Some of the guys late in drafts that Jeff Bell and I are targeting: Kurtis Rourke, Jaylin Noel, Kyle Williams, Nick Nash, Isaiah Neyor, Tahj Brooks, Jaydon Blue, Luke Lachey, and CJ Dippre. Is it Dippre or Dippre? We
I
can't
think
make
it's
it through
Dupre.
one full show without at least one
Dupre.
pronunciation. CJ Dippre. There you have
Aggressively,
it.
confidently wrong, Jeff Bell. I think that's the
Well, I want to thank y'all for tuning in. Jeff and I are going to be back on Thursday. Today we're talking about rookies, but on Thursday we're going to be talking about some veterans that might be available on your waiver wire, some guys that you could pick up and stash for free to get an edge on your dynasty league mates. So I want to thank you for tuning in, and we will see you in just a couple of days.